about, the Lord put a new song in my heart, and many will hear it and will fear the Lord. And so literally what we encounter, how we encounter God, when we put that out there, when we release the song, something happens where others can hear it and actually encounter God through it. It's an amazing thing. So we just are so grateful for what people are sharing, both in song. People are getting poems. People are writing, little essays, little places where they've encountered God and putting it out there. And it's so encouraging. It's the testimony, and it cuts through stuff. So very good. And this morning, we are picking up with what we started last week. Last week's message, Operation Life, was the beginning of a new season for us, a beginning of a different way of looking at things. It is taking the church and putting us on the offensive instead of the defensive. It's us choosing to engage God and engage his purposes. It's the, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And that doesn't mean just in my house. It means me and my house, we're going to serve. Me and my house, we're going to do what is on God's heart. We're going to engage what's on God's heart. And this morning, we're going to take it a little bit further. Last week, we found out the what. This time, we're going to talk about the why. The what is a big deal. Knowing something knowing the reality of what exists gives us tools, right? It's like if you need help, you need a change in behavior, you need a breakthrough in your life, the first step is admitting that there's a problem, right? Once you acknowledge there's a problem, then you can move on with it. Same thing with what God's revealing to us. Once we know that it's there, that is the first step. We have to recognize what it is we're facing, but then we need to go further. I was thinking about, the first cake I ever made. I've only made like 3 in my whole life, but the first cake, not really, but I'm not a baker, but the first one I ever made was a birthday cake, and I might have even been for my dad, I think, but I was making an angel food cake. And in my mind, angel food cakes are beautiful and big. And I think as a young person, I wanted something big and impressive. That was, that's the goal. So I'm making an angel food cake, and the thing just got smaller and smaller and smaller in the oven. Every time I opened the door to look at it, it would go down and down and down. So I turn the light on and I open the door and look at it. See, you're laughing because you've baked them before, and the reason is you don't touch the oven. The whole thing behind angel food cakes is you don't touch the oven. And I knew that there was a problem. I could admit that there was a problem. The thing came out about 2 inches high. I supplemented it with about 1.5 inches of icing to make it look sort of right. And I recall my family actually eating the thing. That's the most impressive part. But we have to know, we know that there's a problem. If we know why, though, then we can remedy it. Then we can move into it. Say with me, motive matters. The motive matters. We have to have an understanding of the motive behind the movement. If we're going to go on Operation Life, we're going to challenge some of the stuff that's going on in our society. We're going to challenge some of the brokenness, some of those places of hurt. Motive matters. Anybody who has any understanding of the Crusades back in the Dark Ages, motive matters. Seriously, people in the name of Jesus have done some really horrible stuff that Jesus would never do. And we have to come back to what is the motive behind God even bringing this topic up. Why would Jesus address it? What's the motive on his heart? What's the thing behind the thing that we're talking about? And so if you were not part of last week and you haven't heard the message yet, I'm highly encouraging you. It's going to make the whole next couple of weeks make so much more sense. Catch it online, though. We have multiple ways of doing that. It's on Facebook Live. It's on YouTube. It's on podcast. It's on the website. Streaming. It's on the radio tonight, actually at 8:00 p.m. if you're on Reach FM. But get the message because it's the foundation point. We need to know the what, and today we're going to talk about the why. And motive matters. Motive matters so that we do what it is God's calling us to do from the right place. And so often that can get twisted. And so we're just going to do a little bit of a walkthrough of what it is we're talking about. This idea of Operation Life is based on the concept that there is a culture of death in our society. It is an epidemic thing. It's everywhere we look, whether we're talking about actual physical death, we're talking, suicide, euthanasia, abortion, those very specific things, or whether it is the death of the spirit man, it's the death on the inside. It's I do stuff that is harmful to just pacify the brokenness. It's I disengage from life because of the brokenness, because of the hurt, because of the fear. Whatever it is, it's a thing where we're not living life and life abundantly. And so we need to press into that a little bit today. The concept of the culture of death versus the kingdom of life is the idea that we have our choice versus God's choice, where we say life is at my disposal to do with what I want. It's my life, my way, my preference, my choice, versus God is the author of life. God has given me life. God has a purpose for my life. God sees my life. God has an answer for my life. God has a way that my life works well. And we see that in Deuteronomy 30, where God says to Israel, he gives them the outlines, like this is what it's going to take to be in relationship with me. And he says to them, I set before you this day, life and death, blessing and cursing. Choose life. And it's not that I want you to do this, and if you don't do it, there's going to be punishment. It's just saying this is how the kingdom works. There are two realms that we're operating within. There is the kingdom of life and light, and there is the kingdom of darkness, the prince of the power of the air, and everything he does is not for your good. John 10:10 is the New Testament version of this, where Jesus says the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. But I have come that you would have life and life more abundantly. And this is a reality whether we choose to embrace the reality or not. It just is. The kingdom of life and light is in contrast to the kingdom of darkness and death. And it's a kind of a heavy topic. When we look at it, we go, it's life and death. But seriously, every one of us is facing this every single day. You're facing it in your relationships. You're facing it in your decisions. You're facing it in your entertainment. You're facing it in your emotions. We're facing it every day, so we might as well face it head on, right? We might as well engage it. What we're dealing with in our culture when we say it's a culture of death, no. People will say it's about my choice. It's about my rights. It's about my preference. It's about my personal freedom, my personal choice to do what I want with my life. And that choice is actually back to the foundation of what God said, I set before you life and death. But we think the choice is about this or that, this behavior or not, this way of expressing myself or not. We think it's about the symptoms, but it's not. It's about the root cause of God or not. God or not. It's a core thing. It's not punishment. It's just a fact of the universe. We know that Satan, he is the thief who Jesus is talking about, where he comes to steal, kill, and destroy. The root issue in Satan's life, he was Lucifer. He was an angel of God, a created being. Pride rose up in his heart, right? If we know the word at all, we know the Bible at all, pride rose up in his heart, and he said he wanted to be above God. He felt he should be worshipped like God. He should be above God. That's what pride is. Pride is, by definition, setting oneself up above another. Setting anybody. So we interpret that. We all know prideful people, arrogant people, the people that you're just like, oh, wow, you're special. And don't you know it? Pride is more than that. It's any time we set ourselves up above another. So the root of Satan's fall, the root of Lucifer's fall, was pride, and therefore the root of all sin is pride. All sin is anything that comes against the will of God, the nature of God. What God has said to do, we do the opposite, or we do something alternate. That is therefore sin, and it is rooted in pride, because it's essentially saying what I want or what I think or what I prefer is higher than what God says. I have my right to choose, and I can do with it what I want. But every choice that we're making is either choosing life or death. And God just sets before us life and death, and he says, choose life. So what we've got in our society, there's a really interesting video online. Johnny Erickson Tada is, some of you are familiar with her, a woman who had an accident 50 years ago, California girl, I believe, and she was, big into sports and activity and had her whole world ahead of her. And she was swimming one day and diving, and she dived and her head hit a rock and she broke her neck and she ended up as a quadriplegic. And she ended up completely debilitated. The last 50 years of her life have been spent in a wheelchair. And she is one of the most pro-life people on the planet. She is absolutely opposed to euthanasia, absolutely opposed to ending the suffering. And she says in her life, she deals with chronic pain every single day. She has this thing where she has to get up every morning and choose life. But she says when the idea of euthanasia came up and the question of quality of life and isn't it my right to choose, she said as soon as you value life based on other people's perception of quality of life, she says what other people's perception of quality of life says about her that she has no quality of life at all and she should just go ahead and die. And she on purpose fights that. She on purpose goes against it and says, no, I have breath in these lungs because God says I have a life to live and I am going to choose life. And so every day she chooses life. But we have to deal with this choice and we have to decide to surrender to God's will on this. And if we know that the root thing that Satan fell into, and Satan is the author of this death, this pain, this suffering, the stuff that we're facing on an ongoing basis, we know then the root of his actions was pride. Therefore, we know that the culture of death is the product of pride. Fair enough? Are you with me? The culture of death is the product of pride. That is worth understanding because when we wonder, why does it touch my house? Why do I feel that I'm bumping into the culture of death? Why do I feel like I'm engaging it? Why do I feel like I can't seem to get through to somebody who's definitely in it? We have to understand the core root is not about, oh, I chose death today. It's that somewhere along the line, I decided my way was better than God's. My responses to life are better than God's. I have a better way of thinking than God does. And we would say, that's not true. That's not how I think. Seriously, every time God says you need to forgive that person, and we say, no. You don't know how badly they hurt me. When God says you need to deal with that root of bitterness, and we go, no, I'm not bitter, I'm just being smart. I'm setting up healthy boundaries. Every time God says, you know what, you need to come into alignment. If you want breakthrough in your finances, you need to come up into alignment with my way of doing finance. And we go, no, my money, feel free to send me a bonus check though. It's pride. Every time God says, you're like, I don't have any idea what to do with my spouse. I don't know how to engage this situation. And God says, I want you to serve them. When was the last time he served me? When was the last time she served me? I don't think so, God. If you understood, you don't know how hard it is for me in this house. It's pride. And that's not meant to be harsh because we got to understand there's a motive underneath why God would say what he says. And the motive is going to be leading you to a place of life. And really within the church, guys, this is the thing. I'm so excited about what God is teaching us because I believe we are going to be carriers of life on a massive scale. But we got to come down to the core stuff and understand that a culture of death is the product of pride. It's saying I choose my way above God's way, or I don't believe there's a God at all. Pride says, I don't believe there's a God at all. Therefore, I am in rebellion to the way the universe was created. Our culture has been set up in this generation to not believe God exists at all. I was saying last night, I feel like I tell these stories and people must think I'm like 900 years old because I'm literally doing, I'm 45 years old, but I'm doing that back in my day, because so much has changed so fast. But seriously, back in my day, in elementary school, public government funded elementary school, every single morning we sang "O Canada" and we prayed the Lord's Prayer. Every single day. Now that is shock and awe to people. We've got people in this church whose kids have been in trouble because they brought a Bible to school because it's hate speech. In my day, which is, I'm not 1,000 years old, okay? In my day, we prayed the Lord's Prayer every single morning. We as a school declared, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on the earth as it is in heaven." And maybe I don't have a personal relationship with God, but I recognize that he exists. Our nation has raised a generation that does not believe that God exists. And it's flipped it to the point where they're like, if you want to believe in some imaginary fairy in the sky, good for you, but I stick with reality. That is twisted. That is backwards. The reality is, no man can create life. We cannot create life, no matter how we try and extend it, no matter how we try to manipulate it. I mean, we've got test tube babies and whatever, but still nobody can understand what happens the moment that life enters. That moment where we can put the cells together, we can do all the stuff, we can understand the science behind it, but only God can speak life. How arrogant of us as a society to say God doesn't exist. And because we've said God doesn't exist, we're functioning in an attitude of pride. And that attitude of pride has opened a way for fear to enter society, and fear has made way for death to happen. The reason this is because it's a flow of the separation of man with God. As soon as we know or feel or perceive a separation between man and God, whether it's intellectual or whether it's heart to heart, but we sense a separation, fear begins to enter the equation. And fear leads to death. There's a process that is happening with this. So let me follow this through for a moment here. Fear is this thing that comes in. We read in 1 John, we read that fear comes in as a sign of judgment. It's about judgment. It's about the separation between me and God. I feel a separation. I have an internal sense that there's an absence. Again, whether I acknowledge it in my mind or not. And it says that fear is there, but perfect love casts out fear. And we're going to get to that in a moment. But fear is present as a result, essentially, of pride, of a separation from God. There's some place where I have been separated from God, so fear is present. Proverbs 12:25 says, anxiety or fear in the heart of man causes depression. It literally says that. Anxiety in the heart of man causes depression. Now, depression is the #1 reason for suicides nationwide. So follow that back with me. If suicides are happening to the tune of, in Alberta alone, in 2017, over 7,000 people were hospitalized for attempted suicide that failed. That's not even counting the ones that actually worked. Over 7,000 people in our province alone were hospitalized for suicide attempts. The large majority of those would be as a result of some level of depression, some level of mental torment, and that is because they were dealing with anxiety and fear, and that is because pride is present, which means on some level, whether it's overt sin or it's choosing my way above God's, I have been separated from relationship with God, and so the source is actually, when I have been set with life and death, I have chosen death. That's helpful for us to know because God provides an answer for that. God comes in and he provides a supply. Now you can say, maybe some people watching online, you're like, well, that's just Bible talk. That's whatever. That's not real reality. Well, here's what studies show. This is one of the leading people who deals with depression and mental health illnesses, Dr. Margaret Wurmberg. And she says, overcome fear and you are on your way out of depression. Anxiety and depression go hand in glove. Fear keeps depression in place. That's what the science, now that we're smart enough to figure it out, we know that fear keeps depression in place. And so if we're going to deal with the depression, we need to deal with the fear. The problem is we don't know how. We don't know how to deal with fear because fear is just a normal part of our culture. It's everywhere around us. We feel like if we deal with the symptoms, what is fear? It's intimidation, it's bullying, it's the stuff that makes me fear for my life. But really, we've got proof that we can't answer the problem with dealing with the symptoms and trying to provide solutions for the symptoms. Let me give you an example. The Pride movement. The Pride movement, interesting name, is about people who feel that they are different than other people. And I know I'm treading on touchy ground here, but motive matters. Life matters. We're dealing with a group of people who are struggling with some of the highest percentages of depression, suicide attempts, suicide issues, suicide thoughts of young people, of young LGBTQ, young people that are in school, grades 7 to 12, 2 times the normal average of suicide attempts. 75% of them say they've had suicidal thoughts. Now, what this is we've gone through as a society and said, okay, we need to take away the fear. We need to take away the stigma. We need to take away, the honest fear for my safety. But here's the thing, in our nation, 2006, let me get my facts straight. 2005, Canada became the 4th nation in the world to legalize same-sex marriage. We have gone out of our way. In fact, in BC and Ontario, it was 2 years before that. We have gone out of our way to try and remove the stigma, to try and handle the fear, but the stats have gone up instead of down. It's just saying, when we're dealing with an area where we say, I know more than God knows, it opens the gate for fear. Fear opens the gate for depression. Depression opens the gate for suicide. And that's the flow of thought. We've got actually in our province, 45% of the suicides that happen are middle-aged men. You would think it's actually gay teenagers, but it's not. It's middle-aged men is the highest percentage. Why is that? Pride on its own right. It's men who are faced with the pressures of society. It's men who have been raised in a generation that says, I don't really believe in God. Men who are out there pulling it together for their family. I'm going to work harder. I'm going to work smarter. I got to work longer. I know there's 10 guys lined up for my job if I fail, so I'm going to work 21 days straight, 25 days straight, 40 days straight. I'm going to do what I have to get around the system. I know that the law says that I can only drive so long, but I'm going to work that thing as hard as I can. I'm going to be out on the highway, and I'm going to do what I need to do, and I'm going to take whatever substances I need to take so that I can hold it together, because my wife needs me to hold it together. My kids need me to hold it together. My boss needs me to hold it together. I'm not going to bow down. I'm not going to fall down. And what happens is they hit the end of themselves and just check out. That's pride. Because God is our source. It is God who gives us the ability to make wealth. It is God who cares for our family. It is God who's supposed to have the reins. It is God who's meant to supply your life. It is God who's meant to give you hope. It is God who said, you know what? 1 out of every 7 days you should take a rest. Seriously, that is pride on the other side of it. We've got a society that has driven this so hard, we've created our own substance abuse issues. We've got companies in town that say if you can show up with a clean driver's abstract and pass a P test, you have the job. Serious, that's the only requirement. You haven't had an accident, you can pass a drug test. That is terrible. What that says is, how about everybody else that didn't pass the test? We've created a culture that means you have to self-stimulate in order to survive. But God speaks life. There's something behind this. This is not about proselytizing the world into Christianity. This is about literally life and death. Choose life. We have to recognize pride is going to be the thing that holds us back. How about young moms who are at home, who are, praise God, the health system has actually come on board to be on guard about postpartum depression. But one of the things they ask when they do the home checks is, do you like your kids today? It's a good question. Some days not so much, right? But they're looking for the symptoms. They're looking for is depression present. What they're not looking for is fear present. Because fear is, what if I can't do this? What if I mess this up? What if I hurt my baby? What if I fall asleep? What if I can't pay the bills? What if we can't buy diapers? What if we can't buy milk? What if I'm going to be forgotten? What if I'm going to be out of the workforce so long I can't get a job again? What we're not dealing with is the root. The root is God's in charge. He is in charge. And if we can destigmatize it, we can have men who go, you know what? Come into the church and say, you know what? Can you pray for me? I'm barely coping, actually. My boss has me working like a month and a half straight. I don't know what to do. Can you pray with me? And we answer the problem with life. It's young moms actually calling up and asking a friend saying, you know what? I don't like my kids today. Can you come and pray with me? I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed. Why? Because fear is trying to take advantage of what's meant to be one of the most precious times of your life. Let's answer that with life. What about teenagers? I'm struggling with my identity. I don't know who I am. What if we answer that with life? What if we spend time and we speak life into those situations? We speak solutions in those situations. What if we've had the medical report and we've had this is what the tests look like. And instead of going, oh no, what are you going to do about that? And we just expect people to tough it out. We get in there and we answer it with life. We pursue with life. And I'm going to tell you how in a minute. This is so cool. So Jesus knows that this is the issue. This is the flow. This is what has happened. He answers life, or he answers this fear issue, this death issue, with a definitive solution, a practical solution, which is Romans 6:4. Therefore, we were buried with him in baptism into death, that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in newness of life. So he's made the way that we can actually end one life and engage a new life, and it is newness of life. It's a new beginning. Jesus did the mechanics on that. 1 Corinthians 15:56-58. O death, where is your sting? O Hades, where is your victory? The sting of death is sin, and the strength of death is the law, but thanks be to God who gives us the victory through Jesus Christ our Lord. Literally, we've got the problem. We know that it's there. We know that there's a solution. There's an actual answer Jesus has paid for. The Message Bible says of that same verse, 1 Corinthians 15, it says, death swallowed up by triumphant life. Who got the last word, O death? O death, who's afraid of you now? It was sin that made death so frightening, and the law code guilt that gave sin its leverage, its destructive power. But now, in a single victorious stroke of life, all three, sin, guilt, death, are gone. The gift of our Master, Jesus Christ. Thank God. What an answer is that? God has come in and he said, here's the problem, here's the solution, but now here's the why. And we need to know that because we said right off the beginning, motive matters. It's not just, see, how'd that work out for you? You tried death. Sucks, doesn't it? How about choosing life? It's not about God getting his final say. It's a motivator that is different than that. It is a motivator of love. Life is the what of it, but love is the why of it. And love has to be saturating everything that we do in this season. It needs to saturate every decision. Love needs to saturate every relationship. Love needs to saturate every place we go, into communities, into the workplace, into how we do. Love needs to be the why before we even begin to engage the what. We cannot walk up to people and say, wow, so you got a spirit of death on you, huh? How about choose life? I mean, if there's not a good why behind it, it's not effective. We need to know that we actually have the answer. We truly do. And the enemy's done everything he can to twist that. You know, the church is at this point called bigoted, judgmental. We are risking the Bible being called hate speech. That's coming from a place of people who did not understand the why and did not handle the why with the respect it deserved. Jesus said that he had come that we would have life and life abundantly. That's the what. But John 3:16, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. That's the why. He so loved the world that he paid the price. The verse I was telling you about before, 1 John 4, there is no fear in love. Perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves torment. But he who fears has not been made perfect in love. We love him because he first loved us. It's addressing fear. It's addressing torment. It's addressing the separation, but it's saying the whole motivation behind it is love. Love is a game changer. Love is the thing that literally, I believe, we're dealing with situations where how do we respond to what we see as overt death? Well, one of the things that I believe is ineffective is picketing outside abortion clinics. I'm going to say that. I believe picketing outside abortion clinics is ineffective. I believe picketing outside government offices is effective. There's a difference. Love cares about the person who's struggling, who's hurting right now, and we need to. Justice deals with the legalities of it, but love cares about the person. I believe far more effective are things like our pregnancy care center here in the city, who we support as a church, by the way. The Pregnancy Care Center has opened doors for women to come in. They do pregnancy testing. They provide them with information, and they provide them with love. And they have had massive success of women who thought abortion was their only option, who have gone another way. Why? Because somebody talked them into it? No, because they encountered love. Love triumphs. There's sometimes we need to do the right thing in the right way from the right motive. There's just times, we don't stand outside of the strip bars and go, wow, what are you doing in there? How dare you? What would be the point of that? Shame? Love ministers to people and maybe talks to the girls who are putting themselves in that situation and says, can I take you for coffee? Looks like you had a long night. I don't know. Whatever. Love looks for different. It doesn't judge. It doesn't criticize. It's merciful. It's a different thing. And we're going to look real quick at 4 ways Jesus modeled for us what this love looked like. This matters because we need to get it right. If we're going to administer life, which we're called to do, this is a life and death moment in our history. In this nation, we have a generation that's hanging on the brink, standing on a soapbox and screaming at people is not going to help. Love will. Love delivers the truth. Truth has to come through the motivation of love, the method of love. So the first person I want to look at real quick here is the woman at the well. And we're not going to look up the scriptures, but just so you can study it later. The woman at the well is John 4, verse 1 to 42. And it's the story of the woman. And, I grew up in church. I remember hearing this story. And I remember hearing the story about she comes to the well, and Jesus is at the well. And Jesus connects with her and asks for a drink. And they begin talking about eternal life. They begin talking about living water. And Jesus says to her, go and get your husband. And she says, I don't have a husband. And Jesus says to her, yeah, that's right. You've had 5 of them, and the one you're sleeping with now isn't even your husband. See, that's how religion packages that. What Jesus said was, that's true, you said it right. You've had 5 husbands, and the one you're with now is not your husband. Why does it matter? Because this woman actually, in that culture, we filter it through our own religious filters. We filter it through our culture. But what is the deal of the day is that woman was not in a place, she was property. Women were property. They could not be educated. They did not have jobs. They could not make their own money. A woman was either a wife or a daughter of somebody, or their children would take care of them. But financially, the only way to feed yourself was to be married. And within that system, you could be dismissed as a wife if you were accused of having an affair, or if you couldn't have children. She either was widowed 5 times, or she was dismissed 5 times, or a combination of the 2. But any way you slice it, the woman was broken. She wasn't a tramp. She was a broken, hurting woman. And so she comes into this place, and she's with this guy, whoever this guy is, and at this point, it's probable that she is just unable to care anymore. Her heart has been broken so many times. She's been hurt so many times. And it says that Jesus was there at the 6th hour, which is high noon. It's high noon. It's the time when nobody goes to the well. The people go to the well in the morning. They go to the well in the evening because it's cool. You don't want to have to pack water in the heat of the day. She went at high noon. Why? So she didn't have to see anybody. She was so hurt and so closed off that she just didn't want to talk to anybody. Could not connect with anybody. And Jesus, first off, says, could you give me a drink of water? And she says, why are you even talking to me? She's skeptical. She's like, why are you, a Jewish man, talking to me, a Samaritan woman? She's skeptical. And Jesus, his first act of love is going to her in the place and time where she's trying to avoid society and just having a conversation with her. Just giving her the dignity of, you're a person, and I see you. I see you. And then she basically, when she answers, oh, I don't even have a husband, Jesus reveals, I know you've had 5. And the person you're with is not even your husband. Jesus is not condemning her. He's saying, you don't have anything to hide. I know. And still, I'm choosing to talk to you. Still, I'm choosing to talk to you. Jesus goes out of his way to find the one who's been avoiding society because she feels so broken. I call her the loser. Who does Jesus love? The loser. And not a loser because I determined she's a loser. She's a loser because she's decided she's a loser. She's decided, man, everything I touch falls apart. Every time I open my heart up, it breaks. Every time what if she's had 5 men pass away? She's got to think, seriously, what is the matter with me? I kill men. I don't even know how, Or they choose to dismiss her. What's the matter with me? Why aren't I good enough? I'm just a loser. Jesus looks for people like that. How do we find how to change an atmosphere, a culture of death, and distribute life? The method and the motivation behind it has to be love. It has to look for the people that are avoiding society because they feel so broken, they're not worthy of love. Jesus says, yes, they are. What's the cool thing about this is at the end of the story, in verse 39 of that chapter, it says she ran back into the city and she told all the men, interestingly enough, what it is that Jesus had said to her and what it is he had offered. And it says in verse 39, many of the Samaritans of that city believed in him because of the word of the woman who testified. Many of the people, that city experienced revival because Jesus went on purpose to find the one who was avoiding society because she felt like such a loser, such a mess. Jesus went and just administered love to her, said, I see you. I see you. I love you. There's a purpose for you. There's a plan for you. She became the first evangelist in the Bible. Interesting that it's a woman, actually. Interesting that Jesus used that moment to tip the tables, to turn it, to make it right. He goes after the one who thinks she's a loser. The next one is the man at the pool of Bethesda. And this is John 5. You study this later. John 5, 1 to 15. And this is the man, we've heard about this. This is the pool. I don't really understand how it works or why. It's an angelic kind of thing. But the history was this pool in the city, in the middle of the city, had this water that people would sit around. And every once in a while, an angel would come and the waters would begin to move. And whoever was the first person into the water would be healed. Why? We don't know. But we know that it happened often enough that it had become a truth. And people would sit there every single day waiting for something to happen, waiting for the waters to move. And Jesus on purpose goes in and he finds this guy who's sitting there. And the Bible tells us that this man has been sick. He's had a spirit of infirmity for 38 years. 38 years is a very long time to be in chronic pain. 38 years will knock the joy right out of you. 38 years sucks the hope right out of you. And Jesus comes up to him and it says Jesus knew. So it matters that it says that in the word because we know why Jesus did it. Jesus knew that the man had been suffering for a very long time. That matters. When was the last time you went to look for somebody who has been suffering for a very long time? Went out of your way to find the person. And Jesus comes up to the man and he says, "Sir, do you want to be made well?" He offers, he comes in and he acknowledges the man's sick, the man's been here for a long time. Do you want to be made well? And we think, because we're reading the story, well, yes, Jesus just showed up. Do I want to be made well? Absolutely. Of course, I'm going to do everything that Jesus tells me to do because I've got the advantage of the entire Bible in history. So I know when Jesus engages a situation, a miracle happens every time. So I'm going to say yes. This man doesn't know who Jesus is. His answer is very telling because Jesus says, "Do you want to be made well?" And the man says, I have nobody to help me. And every time the water is stirred, somebody gets there before me. In other words, he's been sick so long, all he can see is his limitation. All he can see is what he can't do. Hope for a better reality is not even on the radar for him. All he can see is, I can't do that, and this is why. How many of us, if we actually encounter somebody who's been in long-term trauma, long-term pain, and we come and say, "Do you want help?" And they go, "Nobody can help me. I've been living this for so long." We go, "Yeah, okay." And we walk away. Jesus presses in. And admittedly, it's in a single situation for him, but that's because Jesus lived on the earth for only 3 years. And so we get to see everything fast forwarded. Sometimes it might take 6 months. It might take a year. It may take 18 months. But hope deferred makes the heart sick. Sometimes we need somebody else to come in and offer hope. We need somebody else to come in and sit with us. When we come and we say, do you need help? Or is there something I can do for you? And they go, "Oh, nobody can help me." We don't walk out. We go, "Well, let's just see about that. Because I'm going to sit here with you. And we're going to believe for a miracle. But in the meantime, let's have a cup of tea. In the meantime, let's talk. In the meantime, even on a natural level, this is what psychologists are saying about the issues with fear and depression, is that a depressed mind, while it's unwell, lacks the ability to hope. And so it will hunt for somebody else's hope to suck off of. I'm like, that sort of sounds bad. But on the other hand, that's the mechanics of what happens. It gives us a little insight to what happens is we can bolster somebody else's hope by bringing ours into the situation. We can bolster somebody's joy by bringing ours into the situation. We can stir up love by bringing ours into the situation. That's how the mind works, but more importantly, that's how the heart works. And so Jesus engages this man, ministers to him, gives him exactly what he needs. The first time, what he needs, the love is just the point of contact. I see you. Because where the guy is fixated on is everybody just crawls over me all the time. And I can't move fast enough. Jesus is like, I see you. And then he delivers life. We need to look for the person who considers themselves the loser. We need to consider the person who is hopeless. The person who is hopeless needs to be pursued. Number 3 is the woman caught in adultery. I call her the shameful one. John 8:1-12 talks about the story where Jesus on purpose enters the city, and the crowds have gathered around and they're trying to trip him up. They're trying to find a way to accuse Jesus. It's not really about this woman at all, but they on purpose, they find some way. They say, you know what? Jesus is going to accuse her. Jesus is going to accuse this woman because she's guilty. And they bring this woman in half naked and they throw her at the feet of Jesus and say, this woman was caught in adultery, caught in the very act. What do you say about that? What do you say about that? What that means is that legally, in that time, legally, she was sentenced to death. She would be stoned on the spot. And they come and they toss her down in front of Jesus. And Jesus refuses to say anything. He refuses to join the accusation. He refuses to point the finger. What do we do when we are faced with blatant sin at this point in time? The church, not just, I'm not saying our church, I'm saying the church in general, has been so good at joining with the pointing fingers and going, yes, that is bad. That is bad, 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 wrong, 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 sin, 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 you're going to hell, hell, hell. Super effective. Jesus just stands there and goes, really, are you any better? Anybody who's without sin, go ahead. Throw the stone. He doesn't address her at all until they're gone. And he says to her, woman, where are your accusers? She says, they're gone, Lord. And he says, neither do I condemn you. I am not going to get into pointing fingers, but you know what? Don't do it anymore. Go and sin no more. And we have reason to believe that she actually had a radical life change because of stories that we see later on in the Gospels. She had a radical life change, not because somebody pointed out her sin, because somebody loved her enough to refuse to accuse. That's love. Love says, I know I have the right to say this is wrong, but I choose not to until it's time. Because I can only speak the truth in love. And I'll never get to the point where I can speak the truth in love if I don't open the gates of love first. Jesus made all the difference in her life because he refused to accuse. Huge thing. The shameful, you know what happens is, in our society, this is one of the ones that happens even within church. People come in and they'll sit here and we wonder, why aren't they plugging in? Why aren't they connecting with anybody? Why aren't they volunteering for anything? Often it's because people have this inner fear that says, if you knew what I've done, if you knew where I come from, if you knew my record, if you knew what I'm struggling with addiction-wise still, if you knew the places that I've broken things, that the people that I've broken, you wouldn't want me close. So I'm happy to be here, but I'm not. We need to be the kind of church, if we're going to see a culture or a kingdom of life that trumps over, that supersedes the culture of death, we have to be the kind of people that say this is a no-shame zone. There is no shame. Neither do I condemn you. I am not in it for you to hear me say how you're wrong. I am in it to say I love you first. And now let me help you sin no more. After the fact, let's help one another. But shame is debilitating. Love moves beyond it. So we want to look for the loser. We want to look for the hopeless. We want to look for the shameful. And the final one I just want to hit real quick is the story of Zacchaeus. It's the story of the one who seems to have it all together, but he's just broken. Zacchaeus is the guy. The story is found in Luke chapter 19, 1 to 10, if you hunt for it a little bit later. But Zacchaeus is the guy who's a tax collector who works the system. He is what we would call the self-made man. He's not doing anything really illegal, but he knows how to work the system, and he's okay with pushing over a few other people to do it. Anybody know anybody like that? Please don't raise your hand. But people who just, you know what? You got to look out for number one, right? At the end of the day, you got to look out for number one. That's pride. It's wrong. And it opens the door for a life that the enemy can torment. What is interesting about Zacchaeus is he's rich. Sometimes when we say we're going to look for the lost, the broken, the shameful, we have this picture of like street people. It happens in every demographic. It happens in every financial range. It happens in educated people, non-educated people. We have people who feel like losers, people who feel broken, people who feel shameful in every facet of society. Our love has to be big enough to look everywhere. Look for the people that God wants to show love to, which is everybody. But there's going to be strategic times. So Zacchaeus, he knows Jesus is coming. He's curious. And so he gets ahead of the path of the people, and he climbs a tree so that he can see Jesus. He's up there. He's a little guy, so he's just hiding up in the trees. He just wants to see Jesus. He's just curious. Jesus is walking along, and he's like, hey, Zacchaeus, you better get down because I'm coming to your house for lunch. He does not say, hey, Zacchaeus, been robbing from the people, huh? What a jerk you are. None of these people walking with me right now like you very much. You need to convert. He says, I'm coming to your house for lunch. He actually starts with relationship. He pursues with relationship. He looks at this guy and he says, I'm coming to your house for lunch. What's really cool about this story is it says then that he comes to Zacchaeus' house for lunch, and Zacchaeus is so overwhelmed by the love that he says, you know what? I'm going to pay everybody back their money with interest. I'm going to give it all away. I'm going to return it. I'm going to give multiple times over what I took from them. I just want to give. This spirit of generosity just comes upon him. He just wants to make things right. And we never get the indicator that Jesus said, wow, your life is screwed up. What we hear is Jesus said, I want to come have lunch with you. When was the last time we saw somebody epically screwed up and said, I just want to have lunch with you? Change or don't, but I see you as a person. Because when people came back to Jesus and they're like, why would you have a meal with a sinner? Like Jesus is having meals with sinners. Oh my goodness, can you imagine? You know, Jesus answers with this in verse 10. The Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which is lost. Means that when he looked at Zacchaeus, he did not see the guy who was in it to win it. He did not see the guy that was saturated in pride. He did not see the guy who was looking out for number one. He saw the guy who was lost. If we're going to see a nation change, we're going to see a movement of Operation Life, the motivation matters. Jesus on purpose looked at people through the eyes of love and handled the stuff after. But love has got to be the reason why. And I believe even today, we got to understand that love has to be something that we put a draw on from him and we deliver through him. It's his anointing. It's his ability that allows us to love beyond what our natural minds would say. We gotta see what he sees and do what he would do and feel what he feels. We need to ask the Lord to open our hearts for that kind of love, to release that kind of love. I'm going to have the worship team come as I read this final scripture, Matthew 25, 31 to 40. And if we could do that reckless love song, please. Awesome. Matthew 25, 31 to 40, and I'm going to read it in the NIV. You know it's a priority for God when he starts the story with God so loved the world. And we hear that the end of the story is this, Matthew 25. Starting at verse 31 in the NIV, it says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels are with him, he will sit on his glorious throne, and all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. And then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him and say, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? And the king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. And this to me is twofold. I think it's very obvious to us that God cares about the practical care of his kids. You know, we know the story of Mother Teresa and how this was a life verse for her. That when she was holding babies as they died, as she was ministering to the people with various diseases, you know, stuff that was super contagious, she didn't care for her own safety. She says she looked at the faces of those people and she saw Jesus. And that's why she kept doing what she did day after day, year after year, decade after decade. But it says specifically, the king will reply, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Specifically, even more than the generalities, because of course we know according to the word, God cares that we care for everybody. But he's talking about other believers. That what you've done for these brothers and sisters of mine, we don't become children of God until we receive Jesus. And so even within the church, this has to be the place, this is our proving grounds. This is where we prove we know what love looks like. This is where we prove we know what life looks like. It's when we see the broken and we go there. When people are sick, we go and we don't just command healing into them, but we pray for healing, of course. But sometimes you sit there with them. You care for them. You hold their hair. You wash their clothes. You bring them meals. It's the practical stuff. It's the people who've been missing for weeks and months on end. And we say, you know what? I'm coming to the well. I'm coming to the well because you're obviously avoiding people. I see you. I see you. And you matter. It's the people who within the house are dancing on the edge of, what's right or wrong, like Zacchaeus. And we go and say, that's the lost person. Let's go out for dinner. It's the person who just needs somebody to love them and see them in their situation. It's the person who's literally walking in sin at the present. And we don't go, man, you need to be condemned for that. We go, I'm not condemning you either. I see you. I love you. Life needs the opportunity to be accessed. And the opportunity will come through love. The choice to love, to engage God's kind of love. It's the practical stuff. It's Jesus saying in practical terms, when you did the natural stuff, it had a supernatural reality. When you do the real life stuff, it will have a supernatural result. God's calling us to that. I'm going to have you stand with us this morning.